orange arrow. If you press that button, a little menu will pop out. You'll see some line items there where you can adjust the volume up and down. But more importantly, you'll see 4 PDF handouts that we've placed there. The fourth one on the bottom of the mark is a copy of our quarterly magazine here at Benchmark, and the other 3 are items we put together as handouts related to this webinar. And then down below that, you'll see the chat room. We'll have time for question and answer at the end. Whenever a question strikes you, you can go ahead and type it into the chat field and send it over. Sam, who's here with me today, will be collecting those comments, and he'll throw those out to me one at a time as we get to the end. The seminar series, and this is the kickoff seminar for the series, was a result of our annual firm retreat we held last January, where we bring together our leaders from around the globe to get together and discuss best practices, discuss the trends that we see going on in M&A markets globally, and to roll out some new processes. And 2 of the roundtables we had during that conference were what led to this. The first one of those was one that was entitled, "What do business owners do wrong?" And the second roundtable, which came right after that, is, "What can we do to help business owners stop doing the wrong thing?" So the conversation at the first of the 2 roundtables was really dominated by this concept of grooming, or trying to improve the business. And one of the things that came up in the second roundtable was that we could host a webinar series to talk about the things we discussed in the first roundtable. And so that's what brought us here today for this inaugural webinar. In order to ensure that we're all starting from the same or singing from the same hymnal, I should say, I want to make sure we define a few terms right off the bat. So we'll throw up some slides, and the 2 terms I want to make sure we're talking about consistently include wrong. What do we mean by wrong? And grooming. What do we mean by grooming? So by wrong, you can think about the process of conducting a business sale, whether it's a partial or complete sale, as kind of casting a large net out in the ocean as if you're fishing. And there's sort of kind of 3 parts to it. The first thing is how wide that net is. What quantity of buyers can you get into the front end of that net? So when we say what are owners doing wrong, what are they doing that might cause that net to be the opening of that to be limited in size and not make their company initially appealing to potential buyers? The second of the 3 parts of the process are kind of working the fish down through the net. So what are some things about the business that the buyers will find out during the process that will cause them to lose interest, or cause them to lose interest at least in providing an offer that's a good offer? And then finally, you have the end piece, which is about closing the transaction, and getting that one fish that you're after. And the issue there is what are the things that business owners are doing wrong that's preventing them from getting a good deal with a good buyer? And by good deal and good buyer, we mean both in terms of the structure of the deal and in terms of the overall value of the deal to the seller. And in terms of a good buyer, we mean someone that's actually going to conduct themselves professionally throughout the process, someone who's going to understand the market norms of how mergers and acquisitions transactions are normally undertaken. And most importantly, someone that's going to submit a good offer and stand behind the offer as they go through the diligence process, close the deal, and have the money to get the deal closed. So there's a lot of complexity there in that third piece, and there's a lot of different ways throughout those 3 steps that owners could do something wrong. But that's what we're talking about today when we say don't do something wrong. And the second defined term that we want to talk about is grooming. What do we mean by grooming? Well, if you look at the basic way in which the value of a business is established in the lower middle markets, and our conversation today is about business in the lower middle markets and middle markets, primarily owner-operated businesses or family-owned businesses that have typically not taken a lot of outside equity capital in the past. The valuation model for those is a simple 2-variable equation, which you see on the screen there. We have the transaction value, or the value of the business, equals the EBITDA, which is a proxy for the free cash flow. To be a bit more simplistic, you can think about it as kind of the adjusted net income, or the profit of the business, times a multiple. So simple equation, 2 variables, EBITDA. So as an owner of a business, you can do things to improve the business. Do those necessarily mean that you're grooming the business in the context of today's discussion? No, because if you're doing it to improve EBITDA, that's just simply good business. That's what you should be doing. That's what business owners do. Drive your EBITDA higher, increase your revenue, your profit, your margins, your free cash flow. Those are all things that are not grooming. They're good business. But if instead you're trying to mess around with the second variable there that I've circled in red, the multiple, that's what we mean by grooming. So if you're trying to increase that multiple, you're grooming, as opposed to just doing what you would generally do to improve the profitability of the business. So we get those two defined terms out of the way. What I will do now in the remaining about 55 minutes that we have, I'll spend 35 minutes running through 7 reasons why grooming can be a mistake. And then that'll take about 35 minutes. And then I'll use about 10 minutes talking about 4 items that perhaps are worth doing if you're thinking about selling your business in the next few years. That should take about 10 minutes, and then we'll be left with 5 to 10 minutes for question and answer. So number 1 out of my 7 points. Different buyers want different things. In the world of M&A, we divide buyers up into 2 categories. They're either strategic buyers, who are buying because they have existing operations and they want to enhance or expand those operations. So think of your competitors, your operating companies in adjacent industries, your suppliers, perhaps your customers, sometimes called synergistic or trade buyers. Those are your strategic buyers. And then the other half of the buyer world is financial buyers. These are dominated by private equity funds, family offices for some of the smaller transactions. And what distinguishes a financial buyer, again, is the purpose of the transaction. They have money that they need to put to use. That's a financial buyer. Whereas strategic is someone that has operations that they want to expand or improve upon. So for this number 1 point, the reason I point out these 2 different types of buyers is you don't know ahead of time whether your business is going to be most appealing to a strategic buyer or a financial buyer. And in the case of a financial buyer, you may actually fix something in your grooming process that they wanted to fix themselves. So when we're talking about financial buyers, remember, their purpose is they have money they want to put to work. So they're looking for obtaining a high internal rate of return. They want their investment to have a high yield, is another way to say that. And so if they come upon your business and you've already improved everything that they could think of to improve, they're going to find it fairly hard to get that type of improvement over their holding period that they're looking for. In most cases, financial buyers have either a boss, or more commonly, they have investors or limited partners who aren't involved in the operations or the investment decisions, but they just want to, benefit from the yield that a business would kick off. And then these financial buyers are also looking to exit the business, and that's where they get their big return for their investors. And so a lot of times the way that they'll actually value companies is they'll work it backwards. They'll look at the business, get an idea of what it's about, apply their normal holding period, maybe 5 to 7 years. Some cases it could be longer. And they'll say, all right, in 5 to 7 years or 10 years, whatever my horizon is, how much could I sell this business for if I make all my improvements? And they'll have that number. And the way they'll set their offer price is they'll work backwards, and they'll say, I can sell it for this much. I need to have an annual return on my investment of a certain percentage. So therefore, I can offer at present the following amount. So if they don't have that growth in there, if you've already taken advantage of all the growth, they're not going to be able to offer a very high price because it cuts into the yield or the IRR that they can derive from the investment. So that's when it comes to financial buyers, that's why number 1 is a concern. When we talk about the other side, the strategic buyers, you may go in and fix something that type of buyer doesn't even want. So to give 2 examples, think about accounting software. You may have what we'll call a level 1 accounting software package and decide, well, if I'm going to sell the business, I need to have better financial records, so I want to put a level 2 accounting software program in place. And you go through all the costs and the effort and the migration effort, and you get that done. And the buyer ends up being one of your larger competitors, and they have a level 4 or level 5 accounting system Well, they're not going to pay more for the business because you have a level 2 system, because they don't care. They're going to migrate the business onto their level 4, level 5 system. And in fact, a lot of trade buyers wouldn't even matter. They wouldn't even give extra value if you had, say, a level 6 accounting system and they had a level 5, because they're not going to likely move their existing business onto your better or more robust accounting system. They're going to migrate the acquired company onto their own company's accounting system. So all the money you would have spent on the accounting system, you'll derive no value at all from the sale price in that case. Another example, something that maybe strikes home a little more, is that you look at the business and you decide, wow, you know what I really need to drive this business forward is a new head of sales. So you go out and hire a new head of sales. Well, a business that has enough money to acquire your business probably has a pretty good sales department, and that sales department probably has a head of sales. So this person that you brought in to make your sales department look more robust is actually now excess overhead, and it actually becomes a detraction that the buyer has to find something to do with that person after the transaction closes. So there are a few different reasons why different buyers may want different things, and your grooming may not be something that the right buyer decides increases the value. Number 2, what you try to fix may not work. So most business owners that we deal with have owned the business for a long time, typically a decade or two, and they've already fixed the easy things, right? And what they have left are the harder items, and they've not fixed them or not groomed their business to take advantage of those things because they're either very time-consuming, very risky, very capital-intensive. There's generally a reason why they haven't done them. So when the business owner sits down and says, all right, I've built my business the way I wanted to build the business, now let me look at grooming, they're very unlikely to find something easy to go out and do. So as we try something harder, there's always a chance that it doesn't work. So for example, suppose that you decide to implement a new sales piece of software, a new CRM. If you've ever done a migration of something like that, there's a lot of risk involved. You can lose data, the data cannot translate over correctly, a lot of errors can pop up. So you may go out and spend a lot of time and a lot of money, be distracted from the business for a while implementing this new software, and it may actually hurt the value of the business because this thing that was hard to do, it wasn't carried out correctly. You may hire a new CFO, and the new CFO may turn out to be a dud, or he may be acceptable for the size of business you have, but the buyer might want someone to be more sophisticated than the person that would have been a good enough CFO for you. Or to take one that we've seen a few times recently, offshoring sourcing to China. Sounds like a great idea in principle, but there are a lot of twists and turns in that process. And we've seen some businesses have some big stumbles after they've tried to get in, cut the cost a bit, make the business look more attractive by changing their sourcing to something offshore. Number 3, the buyer can probably fix whatever this is better and cheaper than you can. You know, we all know what it's like to do something for the first time. It's always harder, it's always more risky, it always takes longer, it usually costs more than if you're doing it for the 3rd, 4th, or 15th, or 30th time. And most buyers, whatever grooming idea you've thought of, they've done it before. So it's not a case of first instance for them. This gives them a natural advantage. So they're going to be able to, if you wait and let them do it after the acquisition, they're going to be able to do it more cheaply than what it costs you to put it in place. So while you putting it in place may increase the value, it's not going to increase it by as much as you think. Because if you did it, it took you 6 months and cost you $50,000, they may look at it and say that's a 1 month, $20,000 improvement, and up their price only according to what they believe it would have cost them. So for example, to go back to the CFO that I mentioned earlier, suppose that you overpay for that new CFO. Well, a buyer comes in, they're going to have a better idea of what the market is. They're probably going to have more pricing power than you have to get a good price, and they're probably going to have a lot of business contacts around the area to, wider talent pool that they could pull from. Or to go back to licensing, So if you know anything about the pricing of software licenses, you may have noticed that your business has grown over time. The volume discounts for software are amazing. You can get 80, 90% off if you get into super high volumes. So you may go out and buy that new accounting software, and suppose you're dead on and you picked the exact right accounting software package that your buyer wants. You've probably paid more per seat or per instance than the buyer would have had to pay if they were to go out and buy it after the acquisition and provide it to the company. Number 4, time. So we often ask our clients how many hours a week they spend working on the business, and the common answer is at least 50 or 60. We don't ask our clients, are you looking for a second job at the same time? But we know the answer to that would be no. And going through the sale process afterwards, many of our clients tell us, wow, yeah, going through the sale process was like having a second job. Well, going through the grooming process can be like having a second job also. And the main reason we know, again, from our experience with our clients, that business owners are looking to sell is because they want to get their time back. So if you're already spending 50 or 60 hours a week on the business, how much more time do you want to commit to carrying out the grooming exercise? And the reason that's such an issue is because where that time is normally going to come from, you're already spending 50 or 60. What you're more likely to do is try to fit the grooming effort into those 50 or 60 hours. And that means you're spending less time focusing on the business. And, we think back to that formula I said, EBITDA, usually the trailing 12 months of EBITDA times a multiple. What happens if you take your eye off the ball? What happens if your management team involved in the grooming takes their eye off the ball? Your EBITDA can dip. When your EBITDA dips, you may be raising the multiple on one side, but you're lowering the EBITDA on the other side, so your grooming effort is not really creating any value once you run through that equation. Number 5, grooming doesn't happen overnight. Again, going back to that formula, we were talking about trailing 12 months of EBITDA. So some buyers will look at 3 years of trailing EBITDA. But even if we assume that that the buyer of interest here is only going to look back 12 months, you have to think about, again, hiring a new CFO. You have to think of the time to decide what you want in a person, the time to recruit the person, the time to negotiate their employment. They're giving 2 weeks of notice or whatever to their current employer. Maybe they need to relocate. Then they finally show up. A new CFO doesn't step in and change things overnight. Think about how many months it takes a new CFO to really get their feet on the ground, understand the business's finances as they currently operate, and then start implementing changes that have to be paid for, changes that involve negotiation with vendors or identifying certain people to bring in. So you have a whole nother iteration of delays associated with that. And then, think about after all those months, once the CFO is there, starting to have an impact, you're still going to be looking back 12 months from the closing at your EBITDA to set the value. So suppose you get the person in on time, they do all that, and the transaction is going to happen 6 months later. Whatever the value of their increase to the business is, if it's only having an effect for 6 months, you're only going to get a 50% benefit off that 6 months out of the 12 months. So this built-in lag has to be taken into consideration. Number 6, as I mentioned earlier, the sales process is grueling. You need to go into that process as an owner, well-rested, eager, excited, and ready to go. The worst thing you could do for yourself is to start the sale process having just gone through some other grueling task, which you've piled on top of your normal 50 or 60 hours a week of work, and get into this thing feeling like you're halfway through a marathon instead of just sitting at the starting point of a 10K. So grooming will drain you. It will lead you to kind of stumble into the sale process as opposed to going in fresh. So those are the first 6. The 7th is really different. The 6 things that I've talked about so far are really internal to the business. Number 7, we talk about the outside world. And while you may have an ideal timeline for your business sale, the world may have a different view of what's an ideal time to sell. And if you look at what's going on right now on a global, national, macroeconomic level, the external world is pretty well groomed at the moment. And I'll talk through a couple of the major factors so that you can make your own decision about whether you think your efforts to increase the multiple internally are going to be boosted by external factors increasing the multiple, or whether those might detract over the next several years. So the first thing to talk about is interest rates. Interest rates are important for two reasons. The first is obvious, and the second is a little more subtle. I think people not involved in M&A on a daily basis don't really get the second one until they hear it. But the first one is that with low interest rates, which we have enjoyed historically low interest rates for the last few years, and we do still presently enjoy great interest rates, about 40% of the average purchase price in an M&A transaction in the lower middle markets and middle markets is comprised of debt. The buyer will put in 60% of their own money, and they will get 40% typically from banks or other financial institutions in the form of loans. So if they can get those loans at a low interest rate, they can pass some of that savings on to you through the purchase price. And as a result, you get higher multiples due to the low interest rate. So that's the obvious thing I think most people understand about interest rates. The point that's a little more subtle is that when you think about wealthy people and institutions such as insurance companies, pension funds, they have money. They're sitting on money, and they have to get a yield on that money. And so traditionally, they've been able to put that into things like bonds and government securities. But for the last 8 to 10 years, there's been very little to no real yield on those type of investments. So what's happened over that time is these wealthy individuals and these institutions sitting on cash have looked for places to put their money, and they've pushed it towards private equity. So what we see is, as long as interest rates remain low, that money will continue to flow into private equity as it has for the last 8 to 10 years. If interest rates start to trend up, suddenly the yield on bonds, government securities, and those type of traditional investments for pension funds and wealthy individuals will again appear attractive, and the money will flow out of private equity, or at least stop coming into private equity as the yield becomes available in other types of assets. So two reasons why interest rates are incredibly important to this equation of EBITDA times multiple. Draw your own conclusion on whether you think interest rates will be going up or down in the future. The next point, though, about the external world and how well it's groomed is the cash on the corporate books. So we've probably heard about this. It's pretty well talked about in the media. But over the last 8 to 10 years, companies that have been doing well have not been spending their money. They've not been passing out as dividends. They've not really been buying back their stock if they're publicly traded. And they haven't been investing it in a lot of new areas. So they're sitting on this cash, and they need to do something with the cash. And as the economic upturn lengthens in time, and that money's been sitting there for longer, they're starting to release that cash. They're starting to use it. And what do they use it for? They use it to go out and buy businesses in large part. So if you think the cash on corporate balance sheets is going to go up or down in the future, that tells you whether the world's going to be more or less groomed as we move forward. Third point, the Great Recession, as people like to call it, set back corporations significantly. A lot of them couldn't find avenues to grow. And they're, now that we've emerged from that, they're looking for ways to grow. And they're looking for ways to catch up. So they have the classic buy or build dilemma. Should I build this new division, or should I build operations in this new geographical territory, or should I just buy something? Building takes months and years. Buying takes less than a year. So typically when we see companies come out of recessions, there's a big burst of mergers and acquisitions because they're trying to catch up for those years of lost growth. And that's something that we're absolutely seeing right now. Fourth point, again, going back to the Great Recession, you look at how many businesses were started in the last 10 years, and it is a frighteningly low number relative to how many were started between 11 and 20, or 20 and 30, or 30 and 40 years ago. So when you talk about the basic laws of supply and demand, there are not nearly as many businesses out there at present than there would have been had we not gone through the recession. And when we look just in the last few months at housing statistics, and we see the rise in both the price and the quantity of starter homes that are being purchased, what we're seeing is those students that went off to college and came back and moved into their parents' basements and garages are now back on their feet, and they're moving out and they're buying homes. And you know what else? They're starting businesses. And so we're going to see an uptick in the near future in new businesses starting. But for the next several years in mergers and acquisitions, there's a bit of a dip from what the natural number of selling businesses would have been had we not had that recession. And then lastly, the last factor here on number 7 is, for those of you who are in the United States, in times of risk, the United States is always seen as a haven for investments. And if you look at what's happened to the dollar over the last 6 months to a year, the dollar has gone up significantly. And as long as people outside the United States with money view other markets as uncertain, and as long as they view the dollar as a strong currency, that trend is going to continue. Once they start to believe that the dollar is overvalued and there's been too much of a flight to security, the tide goes out and it goes the other direction. So I leave it to you to decide whether you believe the dollar is going to continue to increase, or whether we're getting near the top of the market on the dollar when we talk about the currency markets. So we kind of, in our view, and you can form your own opinion, but in our view, we kind of have this perfect storm of the grooming of the outside world. I'm not sure what I would want to change on the outside world right now to try to get a higher multiple than what these conditions present at present, but leave that decision for yourself. And just remember, the second part of that equation on multiple, you have your internal factors and your external factors, and you can control the internal to some degree, but not the external. So hopefully there with those 7 slides, we've distilled down for you why our management, when we got together and discussed what we had seen in the market in 2016, were really of a mind that grooming was not all it was cracked up to be, and is not something that for most businesses, again, of the type that we described, lower middle market businesses, family-owned, owner-operated businesses, grooming can be very counterproductive. And even where it's not counterproductive, where the efforts may actually lead to a higher multiple, they oftentimes carry more risk and cost more than the improvement that they'll be bringing into the business. But during this conversation we had in the roundtable, there was some discussion about, well, there must be some things that a business owner could do ahead of time if they were thinking about going to market soon. And so we kicked that around for a while. We came up with 4 points that I'd like to throw up on the screen for you. Is there anything that I can do? The first thing, what we call here is harmonizing your external image. And this is a variety of things, and they're fairly easy to do, but they do take some time. So some examples include looking at the company's website. Is it up to date? Does it accurately reflect what the business does and the level of sophistication of the business? Is there anything on the website that would drive away buyers? Because one of the things that buyers do when they first learn that a business is for sale, they go and they look at all these things that we group as the external image, and the website is always the first stop. But if you're in the consumer business, you'd also look at your Yelp reviews or Google comments. Just about any business, whether you're a member or not, would look at the Better Business Bureau ratings and complaints, see if there are unaddressed complaints out there. You'd look at your Secretary of State filings to make sure that your annual reports are up to date, that all the people referenced on those public filings are actually correctly referenced, still working with the business. And we do from time to time have clients that benefit from looking at the mugshots, the various mugshot websites that are out there. Costs about $20. It's a horrible $20 to have to pay. You shouldn't have to do it, but some people could pay $20 and get their mugshot down, and that would help with the process. And UCC liens is another good example. So UCC liens in almost every state now are online. It takes and they're free to access. So it takes someone about a minute to figure out how to see if your company has any liens against it. And it's actually amazing how many paid-off loans we see our clients have, but the creditor's UCC lien filing is still there on the Secretary of State's records. And that's something to be cleaned up. And this is something that can take some time. So in a lot of states, the creditor is not obligated to take the filing down, and unless they receive a request or a demand from the former debtor. And then when they receive that, they have in some cases 30 days to take the necessary action. And sometimes the 30 days comes and goes and they don't take the necessary action, and so that can get drug out a little bit. But it's an uncomfortable situation when you get to the stage with the buyer where you show your financial statements and they say, what about these other 3 loans that you have? And you say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. We paid those off years ago. And they say, well, there's still liens against you according to the state records. So that's all under that rubric of harmonizing your external image. Low cost, low risk. You can kind of do that in your spare time. It's not a major commitment to take care of that, but you start working on those things. And of course, once you do go to market, your broker can help you do those things. But if you're looking for something to get ahead on and start on, that's a good place to start. Secondly, diversify your customer base. I attend a lot of buyer conferences, and at these conferences we have 30-minute meetings with buyers where we ask their criteria that they're looking for and tell them, we throw some teasers in front of them and get them into our database and collect the information. And one of the questions I like to ask when I go to these conferences, if you could only know 4 things about a business, what are the 4 things you would want to know? And it's pretty consistently the same 4 things. I want to know the revenue, I want to know the margins, and I want to know the growth. Yeah, those are obvious. We could probably all guess those. But I was kind of surprised when I went back and looked at the data. The fourth item is most commonly customer concentration. So, and customer concentration doesn't just mean one actual customer constituting a large percentage of the revenue. It can also mean geographic concentration. So if all the revenue is derived from one town or one county or one state or one country, it can be diversified. If it's all from one industry, you can look for ways to diversify into different industries. If it's all from one size of business, you're a business-to-business company, but you only sell to very small businesses. If you can diversify that into slightly larger businesses as well as smaller businesses. So diversifying your customer base means a lot of things, but it's most easy to think about it in terms of if one of your customers represents 25% of your revenue, and you have the opportunity to get more revenue from them and increase them to 30%, or you could instead increase your revenue by going out and getting a new customer and collecting 5% of your revenue from that customer. The second option is going to increase your multiple, whereas the first option may actually decrease the multiple. So as you're figuring out how to, your sales strategy going forward, if you're thinking about selling in the next few years, really look at your sales team and your sales plan and try to diversify in as many different ways as you can. There's no magic numbers as to what's high concentration and low. The rule is less concentration, whether it's in terms of actual individual customers or geographic regions or industries or business sizes, less concentration is better. So focus on getting new customers, not just new revenue from existing customers. Number 3, document your processes. So as I mentioned earlier, the business owners that we see are looking to sell the business in large part because they want to buy their time back. But if all of your company's processes and all of your company's relationships are in your head, it's going to be very difficult for you to spend less time in the business after you sell. In addition, buyers are going to see that as risk because they're going to think, wow, after I pay you this large lump sum of money, how motivated are you going to be to keep carrying on those processes and keep giving 100% to the business? And also, I'm sinking a lot of money into this. Sometimes people get hit by buses. Sometimes unfortunate things happen. They're going to see undocumented processes, and they're going to see any intellectual property of the business that resides solely in your head as something that needs to be heavily discounted when it comes to value. And it's also going to limit the amount of deal structures that are available to you. If you don't have your processes written down, your business is not systematized, your relationships are not passed off to key members of your management team that will be staying on, you're going to have to stick around for a fair amount of time after the transaction closes. And some of our clients, that's perfectly fine with them, and they want to do that. Others don't want to do that. But one of the keys to selling your business is flexibility. You're going to get the best deal the more flexible you are. So by documenting your processes, it opens up a wider range of potential deals, and therefore the opportunity to get the best possible deal. Fourth and final, look at your management team and figure out what's going to happen to each one of those when a deal takes place. So, you know, one of the things that buyers always want to know is who's going to leave when the transaction happens and how important are they? And then for those people who are staying on, they're going to want to get them signed up with, you know, 3-year typically employment agreements. They're going to want them to sign non-compete agreements. And even though some of these key employees may not be making any money off of the transaction, they're going to be imposed upon by the buyers to sign these non-compete agreements and these employment agreements. And usually there's a little something extra in it for these key employees, some type of incentive, stock option plans, you know, bump in salary. They usually get something at the closing. But, you know, we have seen transactions where one employee, such as a CFO or head of sales, simply says, I won't sign the non-compete, and the deal can be cratered. So take a look around, because, again, this is something that, you know, and I'm not necessarily saying to make the changes in anticipation of a deal because of all those 7 reasons we already talked about. However, you need to start thinking about who's going to be involved in helping you sell the business. When are you going to tell the people who are not involved? How are you going to, from the very beginning of the process, how are you going to present those people, right? So if there's someone who you think is not going to sign a non-compete or somehow be problematic, or someone you know is looking to retire, or someone who only works there because they want to work with you, and if you leave, they're going to leave, you need to start thinking about how to downplay their involvement in the business. And those people who are going to be excited by the opportunity, you want to start trying to find ways to play up their involvement in the business. Maybe shift a few responsibilities around, etc. And another point on this is, you know, you don't want to go around and give everybody new employment agreements and salary packages right before you go to sell the business, because the buyer is going to want to have a say in that. And in any business, no matter how well documented your processes are, key management is the key members of management are very important to buyers, and they're going to be very focused in on making sure they get the right situation there. So if you have an entire management team is upset because you've just raised their salaries to astronomical levels, and the buyer comes in and says, I can't support those. You know, I have other employees doing the same job in the business that I bought in, you know, 4 states away, and I can't pay someone here 30% more. It's going to cause a problem within my organization. You know, your whole management team has taken a 30% pay cut, and they just got a 40% raise. So they might have been happy to get a 10% raise when the deal happened, but instead they're looking at it as a 30% pay cut. So you can be shooting yourself in the foot there if you don't think ahead in terms of your every possible thing to do with key management. Yeah? So those are the 4 things that we said. Yeah, these, you know, if you really want to get out there and start grooming, these are the 4 things that, you know, low risk, not particularly time intensive, and they're probably going to help you no matter who your buyer is. And they're not things that you necessarily, once you start them, you have to finish them, right? Like a software implementation or hiring a new person, committing to something there. With these 4 steps, you're not really committing to anything. You're just kind of cleaning up a bit as you prepare for the sale. So that's the end of my prepared remarks. And Sam, have you been getting some questions in? We have about 15 minutes left. Okay. You want to throw me out some questions?
Yes, I did have a few during the presentation. First one coming from David. He said, if not grooming, there's still some amount of time it takes to get a company ready to market. How long would that be?
Yeah, so 2 things have to happen before you can actually sell the business. Once you make the decision that you want to sell, you have to come up with a marketing strategy, right? You have to figure out how you're going to get that net open as wide as possible, and then you have to figure out how you're going to work people through it. What's the story you're going to tell? What are the key value drivers? You have to go, what are some things buyers are going to be worried about? So it takes some time to identify those things and figure out how to deal with those in the best way. And then also you're going to need some marketing materials. Buyers are going to expect a what's called a teaser, so a 1 or 2 page document that's typically anonymous, that's shown without a non-disclosure agreement. And then you're going to need some type of a private placement memorandum or information memorandum or a book or a pitch book that gives some more detail. Because as I said, it's like a fishing net, and you gotta work the people through the net, and you have to prepare those materials. So when we work with clients, it's typically about 2 months. So we actually studied last year about the businesses that we had sold on the market. It was 57 days. So we came in it was 61 the year before and 57 now the time after. So about 2 months is what it takes. We've done it in a week. At some point, I would say probably around a month. There's a trade-off between efficiency and getting the right deal. So I would say at a minimum a month. And on the long side, I think, as I mentioned, businesses are busy. They're already fully employed. And a lot of times the preparation is done by the business owner themselves. They're not delegating it because they don't that early in the process want to bring a lot of key employees in on the process. So we spend a lot of time waiting for our clients to get back to us to help us prepare the materials. So 3 months. So I guess I'm saying 1 to 3 months, but you should expect 2 months depending on how busy you are as a business owner.
Very good. Okay, and then we had Ken ask, my potential buyers are my current clientele and also some of my larger competitors. How do I let them know I would consider selling without my employees knowing and without harming my relationship with our client?
Well, the first piece of that's a mechanical piece, and that's I kind of alluded to earlier, which is the anonymous teaser. So in preparing the teaser, you working with your broker would structure that in a way that you give enough information to attract interest, but not so much that they can tell from the teaser who it is. That's the whole idea of a teaser. But the step that comes after the teaser is a non-disclosure agreement. So you get a good non-disclosure agreement signed before you reveal the identity of the business, and that contains clauses in it saying that they can't speak with your customers, your suppliers, your competitors, or your employees. They can't disclose that until you're kind of at the final stages of the deal, and it kind of gets worked out depending on the particular buyer, the particular seller. But legally you get that protection in place, which is should always be there before anything like due diligence starts. So that's the first step, and then specifically you asked, Ken, I think he asked about what groups did he ask about?
I said is employees knowing and without harming his relationship.
Yeah, so it's very easy to keep the employees from knowing, and part of that is part of the reason why people hire brokers, because then all the work's being done by a different team that's not your employees, and it's being done off-site, and the broker visits to the facilities of the client are very rare, and they don't advertise that they're there. Oftentimes owners will deal with their attorneys and their accountants and their brokers through a Gmail address or a Yahoo address or an Apple address, so they're not using their official work email. They'll take the calls only on their cell phones or on their home phones as opposed to their office phone. So there are kind of standard precautions you put in place to keep the employees from. So we sold a business that last year, 2 years ago now, that was 120 employees all working in the same building, and we must have visited that office 30 times over the course of that sale. And when the business sold, there were only 4 employees that knew until the actual date of the closing of the business for sale, including the receptionist. She never figured it out, even though we were there, sometimes even once a week, which is it's not usually that frequent. But yeah, the client told us afterwards that when they made the announcement, only 4 people knew. So it's not that hard to keep it from the employees. The hardest part about keeping it from the employees is that you'll need to collect a lot of data during that 1 to 3 month preparation phase, and a lot of business owners don't have access to the information. They have, particularly the financial information. Sometimes I would say probably the number one employee that's non-owner employee that's brought into the process early is the CFO or the controller, whoever has access to that financial information. And so usually it's kind of the owners and the CFO, and if it's a technology company, the head of product development or IT will be in on it. Maybe the head of sales in an organization where sales is a key thing. But it's really not that hard to keep the employees not knowing. And another group was customers, I'd say, or Sam, the question said
relationship with clients.
With clients, yeah. So that's an interesting one also. There's a little secret sauce here, but you know, it's you're going to market for two reasons, as I mentioned at the beginning. You're going either to exit or to find a strategic partner. So in the event a client or customer were to find out and approach, it's, you know, there's two responses that you can always give. One is, hey, everything's for sale. Why are you making an offer? And kind of downplay it. Or two, you know, yeah, I need some growth capital. I'm out there looking for the right partner to come in and work with me in the business to take the business to the next level. And you can, you know, you're not going to say something dishonest, but, you know, there's always kind of the shades in there if you get confronted with something as a surprise. But, you know, we don't see that actually happening a lot. We just don't really see the customers finding out about it until typically right before the closing, when the deal's sealed, and the buyer will say, I want to talk with the key customers and make sure they're okay with this. It's kind of a last step. And then running the processes, we always put that talking to suppliers and customers as the last step. So there's really nothing else that can hold up the deal.
Okay, very good. Next question comes from Levi. He asks, are you seeing greater multiples coming from strategic or financial buyers for mid to low EBITDA businesses?
Mid to low EBITDA business. Yeah, so there's no we're seeing the same multiple. So there's a lot of discussion. People argue these people always pay more, these people always pay more. Well, if these people always pay more, these people would never buy companies. So the answer to that question is kind of both in a practical sense and an academic sense. They're paying the same because they're competing against each other, and that's part of the reason why we see the multiples that we see now. Because if there were no financial buyers, the strategic buyers would pay less. If there were no strategic buyers, the financial buyers would pay less. So it's the basic law of supply and demand. Having a healthy amount of trade buyers, or, you know, strategic buyers, and healthy amount of financial buyers pushes that demand curve up to the left, which makes the price go up on the, you know, the supply and demand curves. So they're forced to compete with each other. There would be no reason why one could offer a higher multiple than the other. The key is really finding, and I think the reason some people have opinions that one is better than the other is because, you know, it's really about that first part of the process. How wide is the net? So, you know, if you just go and talk to 5 financial buyers and 5 strategic buyers, you might get numbers that are out of whack. But whether you're looking for financial buyers or strategic buyers, you have to look for the one financial buyer that needs the business for some reason, and the one strategic buyer who needs the business for some reason, and that's who's going to pay the most. So it's really, you know, to do that, you need to know the financial buyers. What's their strategy? What are they trying to do? What plan are they in the middle of that's stumbling? And this particular business could solve that problem. And for strategic buyers, same thing, although it's a little bit different. You're saying, so they have this business already. Who could benefit the most by putting this target company into that mix and increase the overall value? And so at the end of the day, everyone has a story to tell about whether it was strategic or financial that paid more. But the real issue is, you know, did you find the strategic buyer that would pay the most? Did you find the financial buyer that would pay the most?
Very good. Okay. This one might be a little bit of a recap, and I do just have 2 more at the moment. So please, everybody, if you do have any additional questions, now would be the time to send them. But next one comes from Ferry. She asked, what are the 4 items that a buyer is looking for in a company?
Yeah, so revenue, growth, margins, the 3 basic, because from those 3 financials you can figure out everything. And the 4th one, as I said, is customer concentration. But let me throw out a couple more that are kind of the 5, 6, and 7. So consistency is probably number 5. So they want a good, clean story, right? So your EBITDA may be $5 million last year, but if it was $2 million the year before, and $4 million 2 years ago, and $1 million before that, that makes it very difficult to value the business. That lack of consistency, whether it's revenue, margin, or growth, or EBITDA, that kind of bouncing around is risk. And as you know, we all understand that the more risky something is, the lower people will pay for it. So if you can show consistency, particularly in terms of your financial performance and your growth, that would probably be number 5. Number 6, I would say, is how you acquire new customers. So if you compete on cost, that's going to attract a lower multiple. if you have some type of insurmountable barrier, so if no one else makes a cell phone that's as good as your cell phone, that's a high multiple. So you have to look at why your customers pick you versus your competition, and the better that reason is, and the more secure that reason is, the higher multiple it's going to take. So I'd say those are 5 and 6. 7 I touched on a bit more. This will be my last one. The quality of the management team. So for strategic buyers, a little bit less because they're very comfortable with what the business does usually, and they have their own people if they need to replace something. But a pure financial buyer is not going to come in and tell the business, the management team or the owner, if they stay on for a while, how to run the business. They're finance people. They're not business operators. So they can get really nervous about the quality of the management team. So that's an issue there.
Okay, and last one I have, unless any more come in, is from Jerry. He asks, do buyers only buy profitable businesses?
So the formula that I put, I guess that's a good question based on the formula I put up. So the formula I said EBITDA times multiple. So EBITDA, you have to be profitable or at least near profitable to have a positive EBITDA. So if that EBITDA is negative or 0, then the equation doesn't work, and that's true. So the model for valuing non-profitable businesses, and so there's a slight difference between profit and EBITDA, right? So you could have a net income or a profit that's negative, but when you add your interest and your depreciation and your tax, and you add back some discretionary expenses, you might get a positive EBITDA. But let's assume that we're still below the 0 line on EBITDA. In that case, the valuation shifts, and it's a balance sheet valuation. So they'll look at the value of the assets, and that will be the floor for where the price comes from. So let's say, well, you carry them on the books at a certain value, the fair market value is a little bit higher, so we'll go up a little bit from the balance sheet value. And then it becomes a matter, getting a good deal becomes a matter of convincing the buyer that even though there's some goodwill out there, so goodwill is just the intangible value that's not reflected on the balance sheet. And so the model there is assets plus goodwill times a multiple. So the goodwill will get multiplied by the multiple, but the assets are just the assets. So yes, they buy them, but the valuation model is different. Process is essentially the same. And if your business is not profitable, you're not going to have a lot of grooming options because you're throwing more money down, when you don't have excess cash flow to throw down. But yeah, you can sell a business. It's a little bit different process and a totally different valuation model, though. Yep.
Okay, that's all I have for questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining us. And I remind you, if you look over on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the orange arrow and the 4 PDFs that you can download there. One of those being the Mark, our quarterly magazine, and the other 3 being some literature we put together for this event. And you'll see on the bottom of the screen, there you go, on the whole screen here, you see Sam. If you have any questions about today's seminar, or you're interested in talking to Benchmark about our sell-side services, Sam is the man to talk to. And if you're in another country, Sam will get you over to the person in the right country. But in the U.S., Sam is the guy. And you see his email and phone number there. And we look forward to having you all on future seminars.